Hi, folks. This is Blake Dibler again. This is my third installment concerning my testimony. The first week I shared with you about how I came to know Jesus in 1974, and then last week I shared with you about the struggles that I had groaning, and the grace of God. And so, what I thought there'd be a third and final installment where I would share with you about how I became a pastor and how that calling came and just how that came to be. The beginning of that, I'll pick up where we left off last week, where Lisa and I were married in 1985. She was still a college student. She finished her college years and became a phys ed and health and phys ed teacher and taught for 2 years. And then in 1990 and 91, our first two children were born, Brianne and Josiah. And we had moved back to Corryville. We're in Corryville, and we're going to Memorial Church in Corryville. And during that time, we were very active at the church, choir things, teaching Sunday school, regular part of worship and things of that nature. So active in the church. So what happened as we've grown in our faith and raising our children now, Pastor Jim Price, our pastor, came to me. And he knew I had spoken at churches. He saw my teaching and all of that. And he said to me, Blake, there's a program in the United Methodist Church that I think would be good for you that I'd like you to think about. And that was called a licensed local pastor. You take opportunity to give care and minister as a licensed local pastor in other churches. You don't need to go to seminary. And so I thought about that, prayed about that. And I talked, obviously, with Lisa about that and whether I would do that program or not. So I went back to Pastor Price after thought and prayer and all of that. And I said, I'll do that. And here's the way I'm going to do that. I'm going to say yes to everything along the line until God says no to me about becoming a pastor. So I went through an interview, I went through a psychological, I went through 5 classes, and each place the people said, no, we think move on. And then finally was the last interview, and they felt I was okay to be a licensed local pastor. Now what that meant, I could still teach school and live in my home, but I would be a pastor of a small church somewhere in our area. And they assigned me after I said yes to Wesley Church. And that was, interestingly enough, I had spoken at Wesley as a pulpit fill a number of times. And so I guess my first point I want to share with you, sometimes we say, I'm not going to do anything until God shows me to do something. Well, much of the Bible tells us to do, to go, to share, and what maybe we ought to do, and that's the way I felt anyway, was the fact that I'm going to say yes until he says no, and he never said no. There was some consternation about it, to be quite honest, as far as being a pastor and what that would look like. And one of those was leaving Memorial Church. This is a church I was in at that point for 36 years. And my family was there, extended family was there, and got saved there. And so that was a little bit of consternation. Also, at this time, while Lisa and I were starting our family, and before I was a pastor, I was a basketball coach. I'd been a baseball coach. In fact, 15 years of teaching, 12 of those years were also coaching as well, basketball. And not only was I coaching, but then in the summer, I'd run the local swimming pool, which I think I mentioned prior in one of the episodes, if you will. Anyway, I had coached girls basketball the final 4 years of my coaching. And the fourth year, the kids were great, and they were 19 and 2. And obviously, I enjoyed coaching, or I wouldn't have kept coaching. But our head coach retired after that season. And the athletic director came to me and said, hey, we want to bump you up. We want to move you to being the head coach of the girls basketball team and to run the program. I'd always wondered what it would be like, because all the coaching I'd ever done was as an assistant or at a lower level, which when I say lower, I mean 7th and 8th graders or something like that. I wanted to see if I could coach at a varsity level, county-wise, district-wise kind of thing. And I thought about that, very excited about that opportunity to coach. But at the same time I was asked about coaching, whether I'd coach, the church came to me, the Methodist Church came to me and said, Blake, we have this church for you, Wesley Church. and we'd like you to take that position and be their pastor. To say the least, I wrestled, because I really did want to coach. But I also said and realized that I'd said to the Lord, I'll say no when you say no, and otherwise it's always going to be yes. The reason it was a wrestling match, I didn't feel like I could raise a family, coach, teach, be part of a pastorate of a church, and do all those things. Something had to give. So when the athletic director asked me about it, I said, I can't believe I'm going to tell you this, but no, I'm not going to coach. I'm not going to take the position. And they got a wonderful person to coach, and it was fine and all of that. I also, because of the way things worked at the pool, I no longer ran the swimming pool. I was down to three things that I believed God wanted me to do. One, to be a husband and father, family guy. Two, to be a public school teacher. And three, now I was going to be a pastor, and the other things would have to go. And so that's really what I did. I do also remember the struggle of, by the way, this started in 1992, the summer of 92, and by June of 93, I was a pastor of the church. We had about 30 folks at the church. I remember, again, I'd been at Wesley before. I knew folks from Rollinsville Camp Meeting, another connection with the church. And I remember that first Sunday, they haven't, because of the difficulty with having pastor or not having a pastor, that had not had communion for quite a while. And they asked if one of the first things we could do the first Sunday was have communion. And so yes, and I've taken communion a lot over the years, but never offered it as such, never been the officiant of it. And I can remember standing over folks with the elements, with the bread and the cup, and offering it to people that were absolute saints and loved Jesus. And I thought, oh my goodness, they should be offering communion to me. I shouldn't be offering communion to them. But that journey began, and it was exciting. It was an exciting journey to start, and it has continued now for 27 years. The first Sunday in, once again, I didn't feel like I was a pastor. I felt like I was a school teacher doing what pastors do. And I would say it took me quite a while, like 10 years to get to a place where I'm the pastor. And I say that because I was still teaching. The last 19 years of my teaching, I also was a pastor. And so there was that identification as being a teacher as much as being a pastor. For some folks, it was a shock that I was a pastor. In fact, just a couple years ago, I had a funeral at Wesley Church. Now, I'm there at that point, probably about 26 years, 25 years. And a gal who I went to school with came in for this funeral, a family member of hers, and she looked at me and she shook her head and she says, "Blake, this is like a miracle." And I said, "What? What do you mean?" She goes, "It's like a miracle." She goes, "I remember how you were." And, I wasn't sure I had to give Jesus a lot of glory for that, because he transforms lives, and taking one who this one obviously thought was not worthy, and it allowed me to be a pastor. Again, the last 27 years have been very exciting. We've been in building programs. We've expanded things through Jesus and the Holy Spirit, what he's done. And 27 years ago, if somebody would have said this is where it's going to be, I think I might have argued with them a little bit. I remember also, back to the story, back to the becoming a pastor, I remember sitting with Lisa and talking with her about it. And I said to her, using a sports term, I don't want to be known as the closer. I said, they talked about they might have to close their doors at Wesley. And what if I go in there and it doesn't work? And they closed the thing, what's that about? And then I said, but no, wait, you know what? I look at it as if we can get 100 people at some service sometime, I'll consider that a success. Well, Jesus decided to blow my mind, and decided to take me and this congregation of wonderful, marvelous people to places I never really imagined. To God be the glory. Great things he has done.